He was a man entombed by silence, a rancher whose vast lands were a monument to a grief he could not speak. Elias Thorne was the master of 1,000,000 acres of dust and gold, but a king of nothing but sorrow. She was a woman haunted by a past that was not her own, a quiet maid named Clara May, seeking refuge in the one place she might remain invisible. But in the vast, lonely heart of the West, no secret can stay buried forever, especially a secret kept for the sake of forgotten children. What happens when a man who has lost everything discovers a woman who has nothing left to lose but her soul? Their story is a reminder that the deepest wounds can be healed by the most unexpected kindness, and that a home is not built with timber and nails, but with courage and love. Where in the world are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of redemption and second chances, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that will touch your heart. We have another very special story waiting for you next week. The Thorne Ranch sprawled under the Montana sky like a sleeping giant, its heart the grand, empty house where Elias Thorne lived. He was a man carved from the same granite as the mountains that framed his property, broad-shouldered and quiet, his face a roadmap of hardships that had stolen the light from his eyes. Years ago, a fire had claimed more than his first, smaller home. It had devoured his wife, his son, and the man he used to be. Now, wealth was his only companion, a cold comfort that filled his barns with the finest cattle and his house with a silence as deep as a grave. Into this silence walked Clara May Thompson. She was hired as a maid, a woman so quiet she seemed to move through the cavernous rooms like a ghost, leaving behind only the scent of lemon oil and the gleam of polished wood. She had a fragility about her, a fineness to her features that seemed at odds with the drudgery of her work, yet her hands, though slender, were capable and tireless. Elias watched her from a distance, from the shadowed arch of his study doorway or the top of the grand staircase. He noted the careful way she handled the porcelain figurines of a shepherdess and her lamb, the last things his wife had touched. He saw the profound, bone-deep weariness that settled upon her the moment she thought no one was looking, a weariness that went far beyond physical labor. There was a story in the violet smudges beneath her eyes, a history in the way she flinched at a suddenly raised voice. She spoke little, her voice soft and even, asking for nothing, expecting even less. She was a puzzle, and Elias, a man who had long since lost interest in the world, found himself inexplicably drawn to solving it. Clara's days were a rhythm of chores, a litany of tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering down the dark corridors of memory. She scrubbed floors until the black and white tiles of the great hall reflected the chandeliers like a shattered sky. She dusted furniture that held the imprint of a family she would never know, her touch gentle on the arms of the chair where Elias's wife had likely Saturday. She felt his presence more than she saw him, a tall, brooding shadow in the periphery of her vision. His silence was a heavy blanket over the house, and at first, it frightened her. It felt like the prelude to a storm, the kind of quiet that had preceded the ruin of her own family. But as the weeks turned into a month, she began to understand that his silence was not born of anger, but of a pain so immense it had consumed all his words. She saw it when he stood by the window overlooking the charred patch of land where his old house had been, his powerful frame rigid with unshed grief. She felt it in the way he treated his animals, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle on the muzzle of an aging horse. One afternoon, while beating rugs outside, she saw him stop to watch a small, stray dog that had wandered onto the property. He did not shoo it away. He simply stood there, watching, his expression one of distant, profound loneliness. Later that day, she found a bowl of water and a plate of scraps near the barn, left by an unseen hand. It was in these small, unspoken acts of kindness that she began to see the man beneath the millionaire rancher, the gentle heart still beating within the giant's chest. A strange, unspoken understanding began to weave itself between them, a fragile thread spun from their shared solitude. The day's heat had finally broken, surrendering to a cool evening breeze that rustled the cottonwoods along the creek. A storm was gathering in the west, the clouds piling up like bruised plums against the fading light. Clara finished her final task, wiping down the long mahogany dining table that had not seated more than one person for 5 years. She untied her apron, her movements methodical, her face pale with exhaustion. Elias watched from his study as she stepped out the back door, a small bundle tucked under her arm. He expected her to take the short path to the small, clean cabin he'd provided for her, nestled in a grove of aspens. It was the sensible thing to do, with the storm poised to break. But she didn't. She bypassed the path to her cabin entirely, her figure a slender silhouette against the darkening horizon as she headed west, toward the most forgotten and desolate corner of his massive property. A furrow deepened between Elias's brows. There was nothing out there but broken-down fences, sagebrush, and the skeletal remains of the old county orphanage, a place that had been abandoned for a decade, a ruin shunned by locals as a place of bad memories. Why would she go there? A disquieting instinct, sharp and unfamiliar, pricked at him. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, concern. Pulling on his coat, he stepped out into the wind, the first fat drops of rain spotting the dust at his feet. He kept his distance, a tall shadow moving through the deeper shadows, following the lone figure of his maid as she walked steadily toward the ruins, as if pulled by an invisible string. The wind grew stronger, whipping her skirts around her ankles, but she never faltered, her purpose as unwavering as the coming storm. The old orphanage stood like a gaping wound on the landscape, its windows like vacant eyes, its porch sagging like a broken jaw. The wind moaned through the gaps in its weathered planks. Elias crept closer, his boots silent on the damp earth, the rain now falling in a steady, somber rhythm. He moved to the side of the building, to a grimy window where a faint, flickering light pulsed from within. Wiping away a layer of dirt with his sleeve, he peered inside. And what he saw struck the air from his lungs. The sight unraveled him, undoing years of carefully constructed apathy in a single, heart-stopping moment. There, in the center of the dilapidated main room, was Clara. She was not alone. Huddled around a small, sputtering fire were 6 children, their faces pale and thin, their clothes little more than clean rags. They ranged in age from a small girl of perhaps 5, clutching a headless doll, to a boy of about 12 who looked at Clara with an expression of fierce, desperate loyalty. Clara was on her knees, breaking a loaf of bread from his own pantry, into 7 equal pieces. She handed one to each child before taking the smallest piece for herself. The bundle she had carried contained not her own meager possessions, but 2 patched blankets which she now draped over the shoulders of the youngest children. After they had eaten their scant meal, she gathered them close, and in the wavering candlelight, her soft voice filled the decaying room as she read from a worn, tattered book. It was a story about a brave knight. For a moment, Elias could not move. He was rooted to the spot, a witness to a scene of such desperate, profound love it felt sacred. His own loss crashed over him, the memory of reading to his own son, tucked into a warm bed in a safe house. Here, in this place of ruin, this quiet, resilient woman had created a fortress of care with nothing but her own meager wages and the sheer force of her will. The great, wealthy Elias Thorne, a man who had everything, felt a powerful, humbling shame. This woman, who had nothing, was giving everything she had. Elias stumbled back from the window, his mind a maelstrom of shock and a strange, fierce admiration. He retreated into the rainy darkness, his heart, which he had thought long dead and buried, beating a painful, unfamiliar rhythm against his ribs. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his vast, silent living room, the fire roaring in the hearth, and saw only the image of those small, hungry faces and Clara's gentle hands breaking bread. A storm of a different kind was breaking inside of him. His first instinct was to confront her, to demand an explanation. But what would he say? That she was trespassing? That she was stealing food to feed starving children? The thought shamed him to his core. He was a man of immense resources, living in opulent solitude while children starved in a ruin on the edge of his land. The injustice of it was a physical weight. So he chose a different path. The next morning, before the sun had even crested the mountains, he loaded a wooden crate with sacks of flour, potatoes, smoked hams, and tins of condensed milk from his own overflowing larder. Under the cover of the pre-dawn gloom, he carried the heavy crate to the dilapidated porch of the orphanage and left it there, retreating before anyone could stir. When Clara discovered the crate, her heart seized with terror. She was found out. She would be dismissed, cast out, and the children would have no one. She scanned the horizon, expecting to see the grim, accusing figure of the rancher. But there was no one. Only the silent, anonymous gift. The next day, a stack of thick wool blankets appeared. The day after that, a neatly chopped pile of firewood, enough to last for weeks. A silent conversation began between them, carried on the morning air. It was a language of provision and gratitude, of unspoken questions and answered needs. Clara began to feel a different kind of fear, a fragile, tentative hope that was almost more terrifying than despair. She did not know who her benefactor was, but she prayed for him every night, this faceless angel who had answered a prayer she had been too afraid to even whisper. Weeks passed in this strange, silent communion. The children grew stronger, a touch of color returning to their cheeks. The haunted look in their eyes began to be replaced by a cautious spark of life. Inside the main house, Elias found himself observing Clara not as an employer, but as a man watching a woman he deeply respected. He saw the way the lines of exhaustion around her eyes had softened, ever so slightly. He began to orchestrate reasons to speak with her, his words still sparse but no longer empty. One afternoon, he found her in the garden, tending to his late wife's rose bushes, which had been neglected for years. "The fence line near the old county property needs checking," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. "The posts might be rotten." Clara looked up, her hand stilled in the soil. She searched his face, his gaze steady and direct. There was no accusation there, no anger. There was something else, something she couldn't name, a deep, resonant empathy. I would not know, sir," she stammered, her heart hammering. He held her gaze. "The children," he said, the word simple, direct. "Are they well?" Clara's breath caught in her throat. The secret was out, laid bare between them, not with a crack of thunder, but with the quiet fall of a leaf. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of fear and relief all at once. She could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Good," Elias said, his tone gruff, but his eyes soft. "A cold winter is coming. They will need a sound roof over their heads." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing amongst the roses, the unspoken truth finally blossoming in the space between them. The great wall of his isolation had been breached, not by force, but by a quiet woman's fierce and secret compassion. And for the first time, Clara felt that she had not just found a place of employment, but perhaps a place of safety. The fragile peace of their unspoken arrangement was shattered on a crisp autumn Tuesday by the arrival of a fine, black carriage, pulled by two perfectly matched horses that were entirely out of place amidst the ranch's rustic grit. The man who stepped out was as polished as his carriage. He was handsome in a severe, predatory way, dressed in an expensive city suit, his smile a flash of white that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. His name was Silas Croft, and he was a ghost from the past Clara had prayed was long buried. When he saw her standing frozen on the porch, his smile widened. "Clara May," he said, his voice a silken threat. "It has been a long time. I almost didn't recognize you in that uniform." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. This was the man who had framed her father, the architect of her family's ruin, the reason she had fled her home with nothing but a shattered reputation. "What are you doing here, Silas?" she managed to say, her voice trembling but firm. "I'm here for what is mine," he replied, his eyes sweeping over her. "My father's ledger. The one you stole when you ran away. It was my father's proof of your crimes," she retorted, her fear warring with a surge of old anger. It proved his innocence just then. The front door of the ranch house opened, and Elias Thorne filled the frame. He was not dressed in a fine suit, but in his work clothes, his presence somehow more imposing and solid than the city man's. He looked from Croft's sneering face to Clara's terrified one, and his own expression hardened into granite. "This is private property," Elias stated, his voice a low rumble. "State your business and be on your way." Croft sized Elias up, a flicker of disdain in his eyes. "This is a private matter between myself and your Maid. Anything that happens on my land, to my employee, is my business," Elias countered, taking a deliberate step forward to stand slightly in front of Clara. "Leave." Now the two men stared at each other, a silent battle of wills waged on the porch. One man represented the corrupt, grasping world that had broken Clara, the other, the quiet, unyielding sanctuary she had just begun to find. With a final, venomous glare at Clara, Silas Croft turned on his heel, climbed back into his carriage, and departed, leaving a trail of dust and dread in his wake. Silas Croft was not a man to be easily deterred. 2 days later, he returned. This time, he was not alone. Beside him in his carriage sat the county sheriff, a portly man with a nervous expression who clearly felt beholden to the wealthy man at his side. They did not come to the main house. They drove directly toward the western edge of the property, to the crumbling orphanage. Elias, alerted by one of his ranch hands, mounted his horse and rode hard to intercept them, his heart pounding with a cold fury. He arrived to find a scene of utter despair. Croft stood before the orphanage, waving a piece of paper like a victory flag. Clara stood on the sagging porch, her body a shield in front of the 6 children who were huddled behind her, their eyes wide with terror. As I was explaining to the trespasser, Croft said with relish as Elias dismounted, "This is a legal notice of eviction. The county, in its wisdom, has deemed this structure a hazard and has sold the worthless plot of land to me for development. I am ordering you to remove these vagrants, Sheriff. They have 1 hour to vacate before my men begin demolition." The sheriff shuffled his feet, avoiding Elias's gaze. It's legal, Mr. Thorne. The deed is filed." Clara's face was ashen. This was it. The end. Her secret sanctuary was about to be destroyed, and the children she had sworn to protect would be cast out with nowhere to go. She looked at Elias, her eyes pleading, not for herself, but for them. All her running, all her careful secrecy, had led to this public, humiliating ruin. The world she had so painstakingly built in the shadows was about to be bulldozed into the dust by the very man who had destroyed her life once before. Croft smirked, enjoying her anguish. He had won. He would get the land, and he would crush the last remnants of the Thompson family's spirit in the process. Elias walked forward, his stride slow and deliberate, his gaze fixed not on the sheriff, but on Silas Croft. The air crackled with tension. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. "This structure is a hazard," Elias said, his voice deceptively calm. "On that, we can agree." He stopped directly in front of Croft, his shadow falling over the smaller man. From inside his coat, he produced a sheaf of his own papers, tied with a lawyer's ribbon. "Which is why I had my attorneys file the necessary paperwork with the county 2 weeks ago to have this derelict property legally absorbed into the Thorne Ranch holdings. I bought it." For the purpose of reclamation, he unfurled the top document, revealing the fresh seal of the county clerk. "This land, this building, and everyone in it, are on my property. Under my protection." The sheriff's jaw dropped. Croft snatched the papers from Elias's hand, his eyes scanning them frantically. The date was clear. The signature was binding. A low, guttural sound of rage escaped his throat. "This is a trick," he hissed. "You can't do this." "I can," Elias said, his voice now ringing with an authority that had been silent for 5 long years. "And I have. Now, as for your business here, Mr. Croft. It seems to me a man who travels this far to harass a working woman and intimidate orphan children over a supposed stolen ledger might be a man with a great deal to hide. I wonder what the state attorney would think of that? Or the banking commission?" A flicker of pure panic crossed Croft's face. Elias had not just blocked his move, he had seen through him, to the rotten core of all his schemes. He had overplayed his hand, and now stood exposed on the land of a man far more powerful and far less corruptible than he had imagined. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly thwarted, Silas Croft threw the papers to the ground, spun around without another word, and stormed back to his carriage. The sheriff, looking immensely relieved, tipped his hat to Elias and scurried after him. Elias stood motionless until the carriage was a mere speck on the horizon. Then, he turned. He looked at Clara, standing on the porch, tears streaming down her face, tears of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. He walked to the steps and looked up at her, his rugged face gentle. "You're safe now," he said, his voice soft. "All of you. You're home." 2 years passed. The seasons turned, blanketing the Thorne Ranch in snow and then waking it with the green blush of spring. The scar of the old orphanage was gone, healed over. In its place stood a fine, sturdy new building, crafted from local timber and stone, with large windows that let the sunlight pour in. Smoke curled cheerfully from its chimney. This was the Thorn School and Home, a place of warmth, learning, and laughter. The laughter of children, once a sound of ghosts for Elias, was now the lifeblood of the ranch. He had not just given them a roof, he had given them his name, legally adopting all 6 of them, becoming a father again in a way he never thought possible. His vast fortune, once a cold monument to loss, was now a tool for building a future. And at the heart of it all was Clara. She was no longer the silent maid, but Clara Thorne, his wife. The wedding had been a simple affair, witnessed by the children and the loyal ranch hands, held under the wide Montana sky. The deep sadness had finally lifted from her eyes, replaced by a radiant peace. She was the mistress of the ranch now, not by title, but by the love and grace she poured into every corner of it. She ran the school, nurtured the children, and had, with her quiet strength, taught Elias how to live again. They stood together on the porch of the main house, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, painting the clouds in hues of rose and gold. Down by the creek, the children were playing, their joyous shouts echoing in the clear evening air. Elias reached out and took her hand, his large, work-roughened palm enveloping hers. They did not need to speak. The silence between them was no longer an abyss of grief, but a shared space of profound understanding and contentment. He had followed his maid into the darkness of her secrets, and what he had discovered had changed everything. He had found a reason to rebuild, a purpose to protect, and a love that had led them both out of the ruins and into the light. The Thorn Ranch was no longer a kingdom of sorrow, it was a sanctuary of hope, a testament to the resilient power of the human heart to heal, to grow, and to build a home.